My name is Jessica, and I'm 28 years old. I live in Portland, Oregon, where I work two jobs. One as a marketing coordinator at a small tech company, and another as a freelance graphic designer on weekends. I've always been the responsible one in my family, the one who pays her bills on time, saves money, and works hard for everything I have. My cousin Tyler is a different story entirely. At 26, Tyler has never held a steady job for more than 6 months, but somehow he's always had money. That's because Tyler is what you might call the family's golden child. Everything he touches turns to gold in my family's eyes, even when it's clearly fool's gold. The first time Tyler asked me for money, I should have seen the red flags waving like hurricane warnings. It was a crisp October evening in 2023, and our whole extended family had gathered at my Aunt Sarah's house in Vancouver, Washington, for her birthday party. The autumn leaves were just starting to turn, creating a beautiful backdrop through her living room windows as we all sat around eating cake and catching up. Tyler had been unusually quiet throughout dinner, which was strange for him. Usually, he dominated conversations with stories about his latest big idea or adventure. But that night, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly and barely touching his food. As the evening wound down and family members started gathering their coats to leave, Tyler approached me near the coat closet. His usually confident demeanor seemed shaky, and he kept running his hands through his dark hair, a nervous habit I remembered from when we were kids, and he'd gotten caught doing something he shouldn't have. "Hey, Jess," he said, glancing around to make sure no one was within earshot. "Can I talk to you for a minute, privately?" I followed him onto the back patio, where string lights cast a warm glow over the outdoor furniture. The night air was cool, and I pulled my cardigan tighter around me as Tyler began to speak. "I know this might sound crazy," he started, "but I have this incredible business opportunity. It's an app development startup focusing on sustainable living solutions. You know how big the green movement is getting in Portland? The thing is, I need some initial capital to get things off the ground." Tyler's eyes lit up as he described his vision. An app that would connect people with local sustainable businesses, track their environmental impact, and reward them for making eco-friendly choices. It actually sounded like a solid idea, especially in a city like Portland where environmental consciousness runs deep. "I've already been in talks with some local investors," he continued, "but I need to show them I'm serious. I need about $7,000 to cover the initial development costs, legal fees, and market research. I know it's a lot, but I'll have it back to you in 6 months max. Once the investors see what we're building, they'll be throwing money at us." I hesitated. Tyler already owed me $3,000 from the previous year when he'd claimed he needed money for emergency car repairs. He'd been making small payments here and there, but the balance seemed to hover around the same amount month after month. "Tyler, you already owe me $3,000, I said gently. "I can't really afford to loan you more money right now." His face fell, and for a moment he looked genuinely disappointed. But then he straightened up, and I could see him preparing for what came next. I know, he said quickly. "But this is different. This is a real business with real potential. Look, let me show you the business plan." He pulled out his phone and started scrolling through what looked like a professionally formatted document. I had to admit, it looked legitimate. There were market analysis charts, financial projections, and even mock-ups of the app interface. Before I could respond, the patio door slid open and my parents, Mom, Linda, and Dad, Robert, stepped outside, followed by Tyler's parents, my Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah. "There you two are," Mom said with a smile. "We were wondering where you disappeared to." Tyler shot me a pleading look, then turned to the adults. "Actually, I'm glad you're all here. I was just telling Jessica about my new business venture." What happened next was like watching a well-orchestrated performance. Tyler launched into his pitch with the enthusiasm of a seasoned entrepreneur. He talked about market research, target demographics, and projected profits with such confidence that even I started to believe this might actually work. My parents' faces lit up with pride as Tyler spoke. Dad nodded approvingly at the financial projections, and Mom kept saying things like, "Oh, how innovative," and "Tyler, you're so entrepreneurial." Uncle Mike beamed with paternal pride, while Aunt Sarah dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, clearly emotional about her son's ambition. "The only thing holding me back," Tyler said, building to his crescendo, "is the initial capital. I need about $10,000 to really make this happen, but I'm willing to start smaller if necessary." That's when the pressure began. "Oh, Tyler, that sounds wonderful," Mom said enthusiastically. "Jessica, honey, didn't you just get that bonus at work? Maybe you could help Tyler get started." I felt my stomach clench. "Mom, Family helps family," Uncle Mike chimed in, his voice carrying that tone of authority that had intimidated me since childhood. This could be huge for Tyler, for all of us. Aunt Sarah nodded vigorously. Remember when Tyler helped pay for Cousin Emma's wedding flowers last year? And when he covered my credit card payment when I was between jobs? He's always there for family. I wanted to point out that Tyler had only been able to help others because his own expenses were covered by his parents. But the words died in my throat as all 4 adults looked at me expectantly. It's an investment, really, Dad added. Tyler's always been smart with these things. Remember his cryptocurrency predictions a few years ago? I did remember. Tyler had talked a big game about cryptocurrency, but never actually invested any of his own money. When the market did well, he took credit for calling it. When it crashed, he conveniently forgot he'd ever mentioned it. But standing there on that patio, with 4 people I loved and respected all looking at me like I was being unreasonable, I felt my resolve crumbling. The peer pressure was overwhelming, and Tyler's business plan actually did look professional and well thought out. I suppose I could do $7,000, I heard myself saying. But Tyler, I need a clear timeline for repayment, and I need regular updates on the business progress. The relief on Tyler's face was palpable, and suddenly I was enveloped in a group hug as everyone praised my generosity and business sense. Dad patted my shoulder and said how proud he was to have such a successful daughter who could help family members pursue their dreams. Tyler shook my hand firmly and looked me directly in the eyes. 6 months, Jess. I promise you'll have every penny back, with interest. As we walked back into the house to rejoin the party, I felt a strange mix of anxiety and hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe Tyler really had matured and found his calling. Maybe I was finally going to see that $3,000 he already owed me, plus the new $7,000, all returned with the interest he'd promised. Looking back now, that October evening feels like the moment I stepped onto a path that would ultimately lead to the biggest betrayal of my life. But at the time, surrounded by family and caught up in Tyler's infectious enthusiasm, I actually believed things might work out. I should have trusted my instincts. I should have said no. But when your entire family is telling you that you're helping someone you love pursue their dreams, it's hard to be the voice of dissent. The first red flag wasn't Tyler asking for money. It was how quickly and easily my family rallied to pressure me into giving it to him. That coordination, that immediate assumption that my money should be Tyler's money, should have told me everything I needed to know about how the next several months would unfold. But I was still naive enough to believe that family meant looking out for each other, not just looking out for the golden child at everyone else's expense. The next 6 months passed in a blur of increasingly familiar excuses and evasions. Every time I asked Tyler about the business progress or repayment timeline, he had a ready explanation for why things were taking longer than expected. The app developer ran into some technical challenges, he'd say. Or we're waiting for approval from the App Store. Or the investors want to see more user testing data before they commit. Each excuse sounded reasonable in isolation, but together they formed a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. What made it worse was how the rest of the family treated my concerns. Whenever I brought up the loan at family gatherings, I was met with eye rolls and gentle but firm reminders that these things take time and building a business isn't like working a regular job. Uncle Mike was particularly vocal about how I needed to understand the entrepreneurial process and trust in Tyler's vision. Meanwhile, Tyler's social media told a different story entirely. His Instagram account was filled with photos from expensive restaurants, sporting events, and what looked like a weekend getaway to the Oregon coast. When I commented on one photo asking how business was going, he responded with a fire emoji and living the dream. The cognitive dissonance was maddening. If the business was struggling with development delays and investor hesitation, how was Tyler affording what appeared to be a pretty lavish lifestyle? When the 6-month deadline came and went in April 2024 without so much as a text message acknowledgement from Tyler, I knew I had to take action. I'd been patient, understanding, and supportive. I'd listened to excuse after excuse while watching my cousin live it up on social media. Enough was enough. I decided to confront Tyler at the family Easter gathering at my grandmother's house in Gresham. The whole family would be there, which meant I'd have witnesses to whatever conversation we had about the money. Grandma Rose's house was exactly as I remembered from childhood, small but immaculate, with laced curtains and the smell of her famous honey-glazed ham filling the air. The living room was packed with relatives, kids running around the backyard, and enough food to feed a small army spread across every available surface. I found Tyler in the garage, where Uncle Mike kept his tools, and the younger family members often retreated when they wanted to escape the chaos of family gatherings. He was showing our teenage cousin Marcus some kind of gadget he'd apparently bought recently, a high-end drone that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. "Hey, Tyler," I said, trying to keep my voice casual. "Can we talk for a minute?" He glanced up from the drone, and I caught something in his expression. Was it guilt? Annoyance? It was hard to tell. "Sure, cuz, what's up?" Marcus took the hint and wandered back toward the house, leaving us alone in the garage. I took a deep breath and prepared for what I hoped would be a straightforward conversation about timeline and repayment. "So it's been 6 months," I said simply. "I was wondering about the business loan." Tyler's response was immediate and well-rehearsed. "Oh man, Jess, I'm so glad you asked. Things have been crazy with the business. We actually had a major breakthrough last week. The investors are finally ready to move forward, but they want to see one more round of user testing. It's going to delay our launch by maybe another month, but it means we'll have a much stronger product when we go to market." He spoke with such conviction that for a moment I almost believed him. But then I remembered the drone he'd been showing off, and the expensive dinner photos from the weekend before, and my skepticism returned. "Tyler, I need to see some kind of documentation about this business," I said firmly. "A bank account, incorporation papers, something that shows this is real." His confident facade flickered for just a moment. "Documentation? Jess, we're still in stealth mode. You can't just go around showing business documents to everyone." "I'm not everyone," I replied, feeling my frustration building. "I'm your investor. I put up $7,000 of my own money, and I have a right to know how it's being used." That's when Tyler made his second ask, the one that would ultimately blow this whole situation wide open. "Actually," he said, suddenly looking sheepish, "I was hoping to talk to you about that. The investors want to see more commitment from the founding team. They want to know we're all in on this venture. I was wondering if you might consider increasing your investment to $14,000. I know it's a lot, but—" "Are you kidding me?" I interrupted. "Tyler, you haven't paid back 1 cent of the money you already borrowed, and now you want me to double down?" Before Tyler could respond, Uncle Mike appeared in the garage doorway. He'd apparently been listening to our conversation, and his face was flushed with what looked like anger. "Jessica," he said in that authoritative tone I'd learned to dread, "I couldn't help but overhear, and I think you're being unfair to Tyler." My heart sank. Here we go again. "Uncle Mike, I just want to know where my money went and when I can expect to get it back." "Your money?" Uncle Mike stepped into the garage and closed the door behind him. "Jessica, when you give money to family, it shouldn't come with all these strings and demands. Tyler is building something important here, something that could benefit all of us, and all you seem to care about is getting your money back right away." Tyler remained silent during this exchange, letting his father fight his battles for him. It was a dynamic I'd seen play out dozens of times over the years. Tyler would get himself into trouble, and Uncle Mike would swoop in to rescue him from any consequences. "I don't want my money back right away," I said, trying to keep my voice level. "I want to know that there actually is a business, and I want some kind of realistic timeline for repayment. I think that's reasonable." Uncle Mike shook his head dismissively. "You know what's reasonable? Supporting your family. Tyler has always been there for this family. He's helped your grandmother with her computer problems. He paid for your cousin Emma's wedding flowers. He covered your aunt's credit card payment when she was struggling. Now it's time for the family to support him." I wanted to scream. Tyler's help with Grandma's computer problems consisted of installing a few apps and teaching her to use email, hardly a financial sacrifice. The wedding flowers he'd paid for cost maybe $200, and Aunt Sarah's credit card payment was a one-time $500 bailout. We were talking about $7,000 of my hard-earned money, not pocket change. But standing in that garage, with Uncle Mike towering over me and Tyler watching the exchange with a calculating expression, I felt exactly like I had as a child. Small, outnumbered, and somehow in the wrong for asking reasonable questions. "Fine," I said finally. "But I want regular updates, real updates, not just vague promises about investors and breakthroughs." Uncle Mike's expression softened slightly. "Of course. Tyler will keep you in the loop, won't you, son?" Tyler nodded eagerly. "Absolutely. I'll send you weekly reports on our progress." As we walked back into the house to rejoin the family gathering, I felt a familiar sense of defeat. Once again, I'd been painted as the unreasonable one for wanting accountability. Once again, Tyler had been positioned as the victim of my unrealistic expectations. But this time, I made a mental note to start paying closer attention to Tyler's activities. If he was going to give me weekly updates, I was going to fact-check every single one of them. The pattern was becoming clear. Tyler would make promises, the family would pressure me to accept those promises without question, and any attempt on my part to verify or enforce those promises would be met with accusations that I was being unsupportive or greedy. What I didn't realize yet was that this pattern extended far beyond financial loans. It was the foundation of how my family had always operated. Tyler's wants and needs came first, and everyone else was expected to accommodate them without complaint. I was about to learn just how deep that pattern ran, and how far my family was willing to go to protect Tyler from the consequences of his actions. Over the next few months, Tyler's promised weekly updates turned into sporadic text messages filled with business jargon but light on actual details. Pivoting our go-to-market strategy based on early user feedback, read one message. Finalizing our Series A pitch deck, read another. Iterating on our MVP based on stakeholder input, came a third. To someone unfamiliar with startup culture, these might have sounded impressive and legitimate. But having worked in tech for several years, I knew these were essentially meaningless buzzwords, the kind of language people use when they want to sound busy and important without actually saying anything specific. What was specific, however, was Tyler's increasingly lavish social media presence. His Instagram stories became a daily showcase of expensive experiences: craft cocktails at Portland's trendiest rooftops bars, tickets to Portland Trailblazers games, good seats, not nosebleeds, weekend trips to Seattle and San Francisco, and what appeared to be a completely new wardrobe of designer clothes. The final straw came in early June when Tyler posted a series of photos from what was clearly a high-end vacation rental in Cannon Beach. The house overlooked the ocean, had floor-to-ceiling windows, and probably rented for $500+ per night. The photos showed Tyler and a group of friends enjoying what looked like a long weekend of gourmet food, expensive wine, and various outdoor activities. I screenshot the photos and sent them to Tyler with a simple message: "Business must be going well." His response came 3 hours later: "Taking some time to recharge and think strategically about next steps, all part of the entrepreneurial process." That's when I decided to do some investigating of my own. I started with publicly available information. I searched the Oregon Secretary of State's business registry for any company associated with Tyler's name. Nothing. I looked up domain registrations for the app name he'd mentioned. Nothing. I searched for any news articles, press releases, or announcements about sustainable living apps launched in the Portland area. Nothing that matched Tyler's description. Then I got creative. I created a fake LinkedIn profile and reached out to Tyler's supposed business partner, a name he'd mentioned in one of his updates. The profile I found belonged to a college student at Portland State University who seemed genuinely confused when I asked about his sustainable living app venture. The more I investigated, the clearer it became. There was no business. There never had been. Tyler had created an elaborate fiction to justify taking my money, and he'd used that money to fund months of expensive entertainment and lifestyle inflation. But the most damaging evidence came from Tyler himself, in a moment of carelessness that would ultimately unravel his entire deception. It was a warm Thursday evening in late June, and I was having drinks with my friend Madison at a brewery in the Pearl District. Madison works in marketing for Nike, and we often meet up after work to decompress and catch up on each other's lives. We were sitting on the brewery's patio, enjoying their summer IPA and watching the sunset paint the downtown skyline in shades of orange and pink, when Madison suddenly grabbed my arm. "Oh my God, isn't that your cousin?" I looked in the direction she was pointing and felt my blood run cold. There was Tyler, about 3 tables away, but he wasn't alone. He was with a woman I didn't recognize, an attractive brunette in her late 20s, and they were clearly on some kind of romantic date. That wasn't the shocking part, though. What made my stomach drop was what I overheard when their conversation got louder as the evening progressed, and they'd clearly had more than a few drinks. "So what exactly do you do for work?" the woman was asking Tyler. Tyler leaned back in his chair with that confident grin I knew so well. "I'm independently wealthy," he said casually. "My family has money, and I've made some smart investments. I don't really need to work a traditional job." The woman looked impressed. "That must be nice. What kind of investments?" "Oh, real estate, some tech startups, cryptocurrency," Tyler replied with a wave of his hand. "Nothing too exciting, but it pays the bills and then some." I felt like I was going to be sick. Here was Tyler, on what was clearly an expensive date. I could see the bill from where I was sitting, and it was easily $200+, telling this woman that he was independently wealthy while owing me $10,000 and claiming to be building a startup that required constant fundraising. But it got worse. "The great thing about not having a regular job," Tyler continued, "is that I can really focus on enjoying life. I just got back from this amazing house in Cannon Beach. You should see the photos. And next month I'm thinking about taking a trip to Costa Rica." Madison, who knew the whole story about Tyler's business loan, was staring at me with wide eyes. "Jessica," she whispered. Are you hearing this? I was hearing it, and I was recording it. I discreetly started recording on my phone when Tyler began talking about being independently wealthy. It wasn't admissible evidence in any legal sense, but it was proof that Tyler was living a completely different reality than the one he'd been selling to me and the family. When Tyler and his date finally left the brewery around 9 p.m., after Tyler paid the $200+ bill with what looked like a credit card, I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. So what are you going to do? Madison asked gently. I honestly didn't know. The evidence was overwhelming. Tyler had lied to me about the business. He was using my money to fund his lifestyle and dating expenses, and he was actively portraying himself to others as someone who didn't need to work because of his family wealth. The irony was staggering. Tyler was essentially correct that he was benefiting from family wealth, but it was my wealth, extracted through lies and emotional manipulation, with the enthusiastic support of relatives who saw him as the golden child who could do no wrong. I realized that confronting Tyler privately would be pointless. He was clearly a skilled manipulator who could spin any evidence I presented. If I wanted to get my money back and expose what was really happening, I would need to bring this to the family's attention in a way that couldn't be dismissed or explained away. It was time for another family meeting, but this time I would be coming prepared. That night, I went home and began compiling a comprehensive dossier of evidence. Screenshots of Tyler's social media posts with timestamps and location data, bank records showing my transfers to Tyler's account, text message screenshots of his promises and excuses, the audio recording from the brewery, printouts of my failed business searches. I also started calculating the true cost of Tyler's deception. The original $7,000 loan plus the $3,000 he'd already owed me brought the total to $10,000. But with the opportunity cost, what I could have earned by investing that money or paying down my student loans, the real cost was closer to $12,000. For the first time since this whole ordeal began, I felt like I had some power in the situation. Tyler had gotten sloppy, and his own arrogance had provided me with the evidence I needed to expose his lies. But I was about to learn that having evidence and having family support are two very different things. The golden child doesn't lose his status just because he's been caught red-handed. If anything, being caught makes the family circle the wagons even more protectively around him. The real betrayal wasn't Tyler lying to me about the business. The real betrayal was what happened when I presented my evidence to the family and discovered that the truth mattered far less than protecting Tyler's image, even when it meant sacrificing me in the process. Before I could confront Tyler and the family about my discoveries, I needed to understand how we'd gotten to this point. The brewery incident wasn't an isolated example of Tyler's sense of entitlement. It was the culmination of nearly 3 decades of family dynamics that had taught him he could get away with almost anything. Tyler and I are only 2 years apart in age, and we grew up in the same extended family network, attending the same gatherings, celebrations, and holidays. But from the earliest age I can remember, we were treated as fundamentally different types of people with different expectations and different rules. I was the responsible one, the mature one, the one who could be counted on to handle things independently. Tyler was the special one, the creative one, the one who needed extra support and understanding to reach his full potential. When we were kids, this difference manifested in small but telling ways. At family birthday parties, I was expected to help clean up afterward and make sure younger cousins were looked after. Tyler got to enjoy the party without any obligations. When we were old enough for summer jobs, I was encouraged to find work to learn responsibility and the value of money. Tyler was told he should focus on his creative pursuits, and that working a regular job might stifle his entrepreneurial spirit. The car situation when we turned 16 was probably the most blatant example of this double standard. I had worked every weekend and most weekday afternoons for 8 months, saving up $3,500 to buy a used Honda Civic with 150,000 miles on it. I was proud of that car because it represented hundreds of hours of work bussing tables, washing dishes, and dealing with difficult customers at Mel's Diner on 82nd Avenue. Tyler, on the other hand, woke up on his 16th birthday to find a brand new Toyota Camry in the driveway with a giant red bow on top. The car cost $24,000, more than 6 times what I'd paid for mine. When I asked why Tyler got a new car while I had to buy my own used one, my parents explained that Tyler had different needs and that they wanted to set him up for success. What made it even more frustrating was how the family reacted when Tyler totaled that Camry just 8 months later. He'd been racing with friends on a back road near Mount Hood, lost control, and wrapped the car around a tree. Miraculously, no one was seriously injured, But the car was a complete loss. Instead of being furious about the reckless behavior that could have killed Tyler and his friends, the family focused on how traumatic the accident had been for Tyler and how important it was to get him back on the road quickly so he wouldn't develop a fear of driving. Uncle Mike wrote a check for a replacement car that same week. Not just any car, a newer Camry with even more features than the first one. When I suggested that maybe Tyler should work to pay for part of the replacement, I was told that I was being harsh and that punishment wouldn't serve any constructive purpose. This pattern continued through high school and college. Tyler changed majors 4 times and took 6 years to graduate with a degree in communications. The family celebrated his graduation as a triumph of persistence. When he moved back home after college and spent most of the next year finding himself, he was praised for taking time to explore his options rather than rushing into just any job. Meanwhile, I graduated in 4 years with a degree in marketing, moved out immediately, and started working full-time while freelancing on the side to pay off my student loans. My achievements were acknowledged with brief congratulations and immediate questions about what I planned to do next. The most infuriating part was how Tyler's minimal efforts were consistently reframed as major contributions to the family. The famous credit card payment that everyone loved to mention? Aunt Sarah had been behind on a $500 payment during a rough patch when she was between jobs. Tyler paid it off with a single check, money that had come from his parents' monthly allowance. But the family talked about it like Tyler had made some massive personal sacrifice to rescue Aunt Sarah from financial ruin. The wedding flowers for cousin Emma were another example. Emma had been planning a budget wedding and mentioned that she might have to skip flowers entirely to save money. Tyler offered to cover the cost, which ended up being around $300. It was a generous gesture, but again, it was money he'd essentially been given by his parents. Yet every time someone wanted to illustrate Tyler's generosity and family loyalty, those flowers came up in conversation. What the family never seemed to notice was that Tyler's ability to be generous came from the fact that he had no real financial responsibilities. His car payments, insurance, credit card bills, and even his groceries were handled by Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah. Of course, he could throw around a few $100s here and there. It wasn't actually his money, and he didn't have to budget for rent, utilities, or student loan payments. I, on the other hand, was managing a tight budget that included rent on my studio apartment in Southeast Portland, student loan payments, car insurance, groceries, and all the other expenses of independent adult life. When family members needed help, I simply didn't have extra cash lying around. But instead of recognizing that I was actually more financially independent and responsible than Tyler, the family interpreted my budget constraints as selfishness. This dynamic created a feedback loop that reinforced Tyler's sense of entitlement and special status. He learned that his wants and needs would always be prioritized, that other family members, particularly me, could be pressured into supporting him, and that any consequences for his poor decisions would be minimized or eliminated entirely. By the time Tyler asked me for that first $7,000 loan, he genuinely believed he was entitled to my financial support. In his mind, the family's money was essentially his money, and my resistance to sharing it was a character flaw on my part, not a reasonable boundary on his access to resources he hadn't earned. Understanding this history was crucial as I prepared to confront Tyler and the family, because it helped me realize that I wasn't just fighting about $10,000. I was challenging nearly 3 decades of established family dynamics that positioned Tyler as deserving of special treatment and positioned me as obligated to provide it. The golden child doesn't become golden overnight, and he doesn't give up that status easily. Tyler had spent his entire life learning how to manipulate family dynamics to get what he wanted, and he had a whole network of relatives who were emotionally invested in maintaining the fiction that he was special, gifted, and deserving of their support. But I was done being the family member whose job was to make Tyler's dreams possible. It was time for him to face some consequences, even if it meant challenging the fundamental power dynamics that had shaped our family for as long as I could remember. The question was whether the family would be willing to see Tyler clearly when presented with undeniable evidence of his deception, or whether their investment in the golden child narrative was so strong that they'd rather sacrifice me than admit they'd been enabling a fraud. I was about to find out. I spent 2 weeks preparing for what I knew would be the most difficult family meeting of my life. I organized my evidence into a clear, chronological presentation that even the most Tyler-sympathetic family member couldn't dismiss or explain away. Screenshots, bank records, audio recordings, business registration searches, everything was documented, dated, and verified. I also prepared myself emotionally for what was likely to happen. Based on 3 decades of family dynamics, I knew that presenting evidence of Tyler's deception wouldn't automatically result in family support for my position. More likely, it would trigger an even more intense effort to protect Tyler and paint me as the problem. The meeting took place on a Sunday afternoon in July at Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah's house in Vancouver. I had requested the gathering under the pretense of wanting to discuss Tyler's business progress and my investment timeline. I didn't reveal that I had discovered Tyler's deception. I wanted to see how he would handle direct questioning in front of the family before I presented my evidence. The whole family was there. My parents, Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah, Tyler, my younger brother Marcus, who was home from Oregon State for the summer, and even Grandma Rose, who rarely attended family meetings but had been invited because the topic was financial support for family members. We gathered in the living room after a barbecue lunch, with everyone settling into the same spots they'd occupied for family meetings throughout my childhood. Tyler sat confidently on the couch next to his mother, looking relaxed and unconcerned. If he suspected I had discovered anything, he wasn't showing it. I started with what I thought were reasonable questions about business progress and timeline. "Tyler, it's been over a year since I invested in your business," I said, consulting my notes. "Can you give us an update on where things stand with the app development and investor funding?" Tyler's response was polished and confident. "Absolutely, Jess. It's been an incredible year of growth and learning. We've made significant progress on our market research and user experience design. The development phase took longer than expected because we wanted to make sure we were building something truly innovative, not just another generic app." He spoke with the kind of rehearsed enthusiasm that might impress someone who wasn't paying close attention. "We're actually in a really exciting phase now. We've completed our alpha testing with a small group of Portland area users, and the feedback has been overwhelmingly positive. We're just putting the finishing touches on our Series A pitch deck before we start approaching larger investors." Uncle Mike nodded approvingly. That's exactly the kind of thorough, professional approach that separates successful entrepreneurs from the wannabes. Dad chimed in with similar praise. "Tyler, you've really matured in your business thinking. I'm impressed by how methodically you're approaching this." I felt my stomach tighten as I watched the family fall for Tyler's performance, but I pressed on with my questions. "Can you be more specific about the timeline?" I asked. "When do you expect to start generating revenue, and when might I see repayment of my investment?" This time, Tyler's confidence flickered slightly. "Well, the revenue timeline depends on how quickly we can scale after our official launch. The investor meetings should happen within the next 6 to 8 weeks, and once we close our Series A round, I'll be able to pay back all the family loans with interest." "Family loans?" I asked. "Who else is invested?" Tyler glanced at his parents before answering. "Well, Mom and Dad provided some seed funding, obviously, and I've had some informal conversations with Uncle Robert and Aunt Linda about potential additional investment. This was news to me, and judging by my parents' expressions, it was news to them too." But before anyone could ask for clarification, Tyler smoothly redirected the conversation. "The important thing is that we're building something that will benefit not just me, but the whole family. This app has the potential to be really significant in the sustainable living space." That's when I decided it was time to present my evidence. "Tyler," I said, pulling out my folder of documents, "I need to ask you about some discrepancies I've discovered." The room went quiet, and I could see Tyler's confident expression start to crack around the edges. "What kind of discrepancies?" Aunt Sarah asked, her protective maternal instincts clearly kicking in. I pulled out the first set of screenshots, Tyler's social media posts from the past 6 months. These are photos Tyler has posted on Instagram over the past 6 months. Expensive restaurants, Trailblazers games, the vacation rental in Cannon Beach that probably cost $500 a night. I spread the screenshots across the coffee table so everyone could see them clearly. "Tyler, you told me that your business was struggling with development delays and investor hesitation. But these photos show someone with a lot of disposable income for entertainment and luxury experiences." Tyler immediately went on the defensive. "Those are business expenses mostly. Networking events, client meetings, investor relations. You have to spend money to make money in this industry." "A weekend at Cannon Beach is a business expense?" I asked. "Team building," Tyler replied without missing a beat. "I brought some of our alpha testers up there for intensive feedback sessions." I had to admire his ability to come up with plausible-sounding explanations on the spot. But I was prepared for this. "Okay, let's talk about the team," I said, pulling out my next set of documents. "I reached out to the business partner you mentioned in your updates, the one handling the technical development. According to his LinkedIn profile, he's a 20-year-old college student who's never heard of your app project." The room went dead silent. Tyler's face went through a rapid series of expressions: surprise, panic, calculation, and then determination. That's a different person with the same name, he said finally. My business partner is very private about his online presence for security reasons. A lot of tech entrepreneurs keep a low profile. I could see some family members starting to look uncertain, but Uncle Mike jumped in to support Tyler. That makes perfect sense. Corporate espionage is a real concern in the tech industry. But I wasn't done. I pulled out the business registration searches, the domain registration results, and the audio recording from the brewery. With each piece of evidence, Tyler's explanations became more desperate and less believable. The breakthrough moment came when I played the recording of Tyler telling his date that he was independently wealthy because his family has money, and he'd made smart investments that allowed him to avoid traditional work. The silence in the room after the recording ended was deafening. Tyler looked like he'd been punched in the stomach, and even Uncle Mike seemed to be struggling to come up with a defense. So let me get this straight, I said, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through my veins. You told me you needed money for a business that doesn't exist. You've been using my investment to fund your entertainment and dating expenses, and you're telling other people that you're independently wealthy because of family money, my money that you took under false pretenses. Tyler finally dropped the pretense of having explanations for everything. Jess, I can explain. No, I interrupted. You can't explain. You lied to me. You lied to all of us. There is no business. There never was a business. You took my money and spent it on yourself, and you were never planning to pay it back. That's when the family dynamics I'd expected began to play out exactly as I'd feared. Instead of expressing shock or anger at Tyler's deception, the family immediately began working to minimize his actions and redirect blame toward me. Jessica, sweetheart, Mom said in her most soothing voice, I think you're being a little harsh. Maybe Tyler made some mistakes in how he handled this, but his heart was in the right place. Dad nodded along. These things happen with family loans. Tyler didn't mean to mislead anyone. Uncle Mike was more direct. Jessica, I'm disappointed in how you've handled this. Going behind Tyler's back to investigate him like some kind of criminal? Recording private conversations? That's not how family treats family. Aunt Sarah looked like she was about to cry. Tyler is going through a difficult time right now. He's trying to figure out his path in life. The last thing he needs is family members attacking him. Even Grandma Rose, who I'd hoped might be more objective, shook her head sadly. In my day, family worked things out privately. All this investigating and recording, it's not right. I felt like I was in an alternate reality. Tyler had committed what was essentially fraud. He'd taken $10,000 of my money under completely false pretenses and spent it on his personal entertainment. But somehow, I was the one being criticized for discovering and documenting his deception. Are you all hearing yourselves? I asked, my voice rising despite my efforts to stay calm. Tyler lied to me. He stole my money, and you're upset with me for finding out about it? Tyler, who had been silent during the family's defense of him, finally spoke up. Jess, I know I messed up. I know I handled this badly, but I was under a lot of pressure, and I made some poor decisions. I never meant to hurt you. His tone was contrite and apologetic, but there was something calculated about it. This was Tyler's go-to strategy when his other tactics failed. Admit to minor mistakes while positioning himself as the victim of circumstances beyond his control. The pressure made you lie to me for over a year? I asked. The pressure made you spend my money on dates and vacations? I was trying to maintain appearances, Tyler said, his voice getting smaller. In the entrepreneurial world, you have to look successful to be successful. I thought if I could just keep things going long enough, I'd find a way to make it work. Uncle Mike immediately latched onto this explanation. See, Tyler was trying to protect his business prospects. Sometimes you have to spend money to make money. I realized in that moment that this conversation was never going to result in accountability or justice. The family had too much invested in Tyler's golden child status to admit that he was a liar and a thief. They would twist themselves into pretzels to avoid acknowledging what was right in front of them. I want my money back, I said simply. All of it. The original $3,000 he owed me, plus the $7,000 for the fake business. $10,000 total by the end of the month. Tyler looked panicked. Jess, I don't have that kind of money just sitting around. Maybe we could work out a payment plan. No payment plan, I interrupted. You've had over a year to pay me back. You chose to spend the money on yourself instead. I want all of it back by July 31st, or I'm taking legal action. The mention of legal action caused an immediate uproar in the room. Uncle Mike stood up, his face red with anger. Legal action? Against family? Jessica, that's completely out of line. Mom started crying. Honey, please don't do this. Think about what this would do to the family. Dad tried to play mediator. Let's all calm down and find a reasonable solution that works for everyone. But I was done being reasonable. I was done accommodating Tyler's irresponsibility and the family's enabling. I was done being the family member whose job was to absorb financial losses so that Tyler could avoid consequences. This conversation is over, I said, gathering up my evidence and standing to leave. Tyler has 2 weeks to return my money. If he doesn't, I'll file a lawsuit for fraud and let a judge decide what's reasonable. As I walked toward the door, Uncle Mike called after me. Jessica, if you do this, you'll be destroying this family. Is your money really worth tearing us apart? I turned back to look at him. I'm not the one who tore this family apart. Tyler did that when he decided to steal from me. You're all just choosing to blame me instead of holding him accountable. I left the house and drove straight home, where I immediately called a lawyer to discuss my options for recovering the money. The family meeting had gone exactly as I'd expected. The evidence didn't matter, the truth didn't matter, and Tyler's actions didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was protecting the golden child from consequences, even if it meant sacrificing the family member he'd wronged. But I wasn't going to be sacrificed quietly. If Tyler wanted to steal from me, and if the family wanted to enable him, they were going to learn that actions have consequences, even for golden children. The real battle was just beginning. The lawyer I met with, Jennifer Chen, specialized in financial fraud cases and had seen situations like mine more often than I would have expected. Her downtown Portland office overlooked the Willamette River, and as I sat across from her desk explaining my situation, I felt a mix of validation and sadness that it had come to this point. Unfortunately, family financial fraud is more common than people realize, Jennifer told me after reviewing my evidence. The good news is that you've done an exceptional job documenting everything. The bad news is that family cases can be emotionally devastating, especially when other relatives take sides. She explained my legal options clearly. I could file a civil lawsuit for fraud, which would seek to recover the money plus interest and potentially additional damages. The evidence I'd gathered, particularly the recorded conversation where Tyler admitted to living off family money while claiming to need business loans, created a strong case. The challenge, Jennifer warned, is that Tyler may not actually have the money to pay a judgment. If he's been living off your loan for over a year, he may be essentially judgment-proof. I decided to move forward anyway. Some principles are worth fighting for, regardless of whether you can recover every dollar. The first step was sending Tyler a formal demand letter, giving him 30 days to repay the full amount before legal proceedings would begin. Jennifer drafted a letter that was professional but firm, outlining the evidence of fraud and making it clear that this was his final opportunity to resolve the matter without court involvement. Tyler's response came not through his own lawyer, but through a frantic phone call from Uncle Mike 3 days after the demand letter was delivered. Jessica, what the hell is wrong with you? Uncle Mike's voice was shaking with rage. A lawyer's letter? Really? Over a family disagreement? It's not a family disagreement, I replied calmly. It's fraud. Tyler took my money under false pretenses and spent it on himself. That's a crime, Uncle Mike. Tyler made some mistakes, Uncle Mike shot back. But he's family. You handle family problems within the family, not with lawyers and courts. I'd heard this logic before, and I was tired of it. The family had its chance to handle this problem. Instead, everyone chose to enable Tyler and blame me for being upset about being robbed. So now it's a legal matter. Over the next several days, I received similar calls from other family members. Mom cried and begged me to think about the family's reputation. Dad tried to negotiate, suggesting that maybe Tyler could pay back half the money over time and we could call it even. Aunt Sarah accused me of destroying Tyler's future over money. The most manipulative call came from Tyler himself, about a week after he received the demand letter. His voice was shaky and emotional as he painted himself as the victim of his own poor decision-making. Jess, I know I screwed up, he said. I know I handled everything wrong, but I'm trying to get my life together now. I'm actually looking for real jobs, not just entrepreneurial stuff. If you go through with this lawsuit, it'll destroy my chances of getting hired anywhere decent. Is that really what you want? It was classic Tyler manipulation. Acknowledge just enough wrongdoing to seem contrite, while making the consequences of accountability seem disproportionate and cruel. But I'd fallen for this routine too many times before. Tyler, you had over a year to get your life together and pay me back, I said. You chose to spend my money on vacations and dates instead. These consequences are the result of your choices, not mine. When the 30-day deadline passed without payment, Jennifer filed the lawsuit. The legal documents were served to Tyler at his parents' house, which apparently caused a major scene that I heard about secondhand through my brother Marcus. According to Marcus, Tyler had a complete meltdown when the sheriff's deputy delivered the papers. He locked himself in his childhood bedroom for hours, refusing to come out or speak to anyone. Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah spent the evening calling other family members, building support for the position that I was destroying the family over money. What I didn't expect was how quickly Tyler would find his own lawyer and how aggressively his legal team would fight back. Within a week of being served, Tyler's attorney filed a response that painted me as a vindictive family member using the legal system to settle personal grievances. Tyler's lawyer argued that the money had been a family gift rather than a loan, despite the clear text message evidence of Tyler promising repayment. They claimed that my investigation and recording of Tyler's conversations constituted harassment and invasion of privacy. Most audaciously, they countersued me for defamation and intentional infliction of emotional distress, seeking $25,000 in damages. Jennifer was not impressed with Tyler's legal strategy. "This is a typical desperation move," she told me. "When you can't defend against the facts, you try to make the other side look like the bad guy. The countersuit is frivolous and designed to pressure you into dropping your case. But the countersuit had its intended effect on the family dynamics." Suddenly, Tyler wasn't just the victim of my unreasonable demands. He was the victim of my malicious legal attack. Family members who had been on the fence about the situation rallied to Tyler's defense, portraying him as a young man whose mistakes were being blown out of proportion by a vindictive relative with deep pockets for lawyer fees. The most painful part was how the family began to rewrite history to support Tyler's position. Suddenly, the $7,000 I'd given Tyler wasn't a business loan with clear repayment terms. It was family support that I'd provided voluntarily and was now trying to claw back for selfish reasons. The credit card payment Tyler had made for Aunt Sarah years earlier was inflated from $500 to $2,000 in family retellings. The wedding flowers he'd bought for cousin Emma somehow grew from a $300 gesture to a $1,000 act of generosity. Tyler's history of being financially supported by his parents was reframed as evidence of family values rather than enabling behavior. Most frustratingly, my years of financial independence and responsibility were rewritten as evidence that I didn't need the money I was seeking to recover. The fact that I'd worked 2 jobs to save up the money I'd loaned Tyler was ignored. Instead, the family focused on the fact that I had a steady income and could afford to lose the $10,000, while Tyler was just starting out in life and couldn't afford the consequences of a judgment against him. The legal process dragged on for months, with Tyler's lawyers filing motion after motion to delay proceedings and rack up legal fees. They demanded extensive financial discovery from me, forcing me to turn over years of bank records, tax returns, and employment documentation. Meanwhile, Tyler's own financial records revealed exactly what I'd suspected. He'd spent my money on entertainment, dining, travel, and general lifestyle inflation, with no business-related expenses whatsoever. The most damaging evidence against Tyler came from his own financial records. Bank statements showed that he'd received the $7,000 from me and immediately spent it on $2,100 on restaurants and bars over 6 weeks, $2,800 on the Cannon Beach vacation rental, $1,200 on clothing and accessories, $900 on entertainment, movies, concerts, sporting events, $800 on a new gaming setup, the remainder on various smaller purchases. There was not a single business-related expense in the entire transaction history. But even faced with this overwhelming evidence, Tyler's lawyer continued to argue that the money had been a gift and that Tyler had reasonably believed he wasn't required to pay it back. They presented character witnesses who testified about Tyler's good heart and family loyalty, while portraying me as someone who had used my financial advantage to entrap Tyler in a loan he couldn't afford. The most surreal moment of the entire legal process came when Uncle Mike took the stand to testify on Tyler's behalf. Under oath, he claimed that the $7,000 had been given as family investment in Tyler's future, rather than a traditional loan. He testified that Tyler had talked about various business ideas over the years, and that the family had always understood that supporting Tyler's entrepreneurial dreams was a long-term investment in his potential, rather than a short-term financial transaction. Tyler has always been the kind of young man who thinks big and dreams big, Uncle Mike testified. When family members support those dreams, It's not with the expectation of immediate payback. It's with the understanding that Tyler will contribute to the family's success when his ventures take off. Jennifer's cross-examination of Uncle Mike was devastating. She walked him through Tyler's complete lack of business formation, business bank accounts, business licenses, or any other evidence that a legitimate venture had ever existed. She presented the social media evidence of Tyler's lifestyle spending and the recorded conversation where he claimed to be independently wealthy. "Mr. Johnson," Jennifer asked, "if Tyler believed this was family investment money rather than a loan, why did he promise in writing to pay it back within 6 months?" Uncle Mike's answer was a masterpiece of circular logic. Tyler is a responsible young man who always intended to share his success with family. His promise to pay the money back was evidence of his good character, not evidence that he considered it a loan. The judge's facial expressions during Uncle Mike's testimony suggested that this line of reasoning wasn't particularly convincing. But the family's support for Tyler never wavered, even as the evidence mounted against him. If anything, the legal process strengthened their resolve to protect him from consequences. They saw the lawsuit not as accountability for Tyler's fraud, but as an attack on the family unit itself. The final blow to any hope of family reconciliation came when Tyler's lawyer called Mom as a character witness. She testified about what a generous and loving nephew Tyler had always been, and how my lawsuit was tearing the family apart over a misunderstanding. Under cross-examination, Jennifer asked Mom a simple question. "Mrs. Anderson, do you believe it's appropriate for family members to lie to each other about how borrowed money is being used?" Mom's answer broke my heart. "I believe family members should forgive each other's mistakes and work together to solve problems, rather than running to lawyers every time someone makes poor choices." She was sitting 20 feet away from me, talking about my decision to seek legal accountability for Tyler's fraud as evidence of my poor character. The woman who had raised me, who had taught me about honesty and integrity, was testifying under oath that Tyler's lies and theft were mistakes that I should simply forgive and forget. That night, I called Jennifer and asked her to explore settlement options. I wasn't giving up on recovering my money, but I was done with the emotional devastation of watching my own family testify against me in court. "I understand," Jennifer said. "Family cases are brutal because there's no clean way to separate the legal issues from the emotional relationships. But Jessica, you need to know, you're going to win this case. The evidence is overwhelming. Don't let their manipulation tactics convince you that you're doing something wrong." She was right about winning the case. But as I would soon learn, winning in court and recovering your money are two very different things, especially when you're dealing with someone who's been enabled and protected their entire life and has never faced real consequences for their actions. The golden child doesn't suddenly become financially responsible just because a judge tells him to pay up. If anything, a legal judgment can make him even more defiant and manipulative, especially when he knows the family will continue to protect him from the worst consequences of his choices. The trial concluded in late March, almost 9 months after I'd first confronted Tyler with evidence of his deception. Judge Patricia Williams delivered her verdict with the kind of measured precision that left no doubt about her conclusions. "The evidence in this case is overwhelming," Judge Williams stated from the bench. "The defendant received $7,000 from the plaintiff under false pretenses, with explicit promises of repayment that he never intended to honor. The defendant's own financial records show that he immediately spent this money on personal entertainment and lifestyle expenses, with no business-related expenditures whatsoever." She paused, looking directly at Tyler, who sat slumped beside his lawyer with the expression of someone who'd finally run out of excuses. "This court finds that the defendant committed fraud by knowingly misrepresenting his intentions regarding the use of borrowed funds. The defendant is ordered to repay the plaintiff $10,000 in principal, plus $2,147 in interest and court costs, for a total judgment of $12,947. I should have felt vindicated. After months of being gaslit by my own family, told that I was overreacting and being greedy, a judge had looked at the evidence and reached the obvious conclusion. Tyler had lied, stolen my money, and needed to pay it back with interest. But sitting in that courtroom, watching Tyler's shoulders shake as he realized he'd actually lost, I mostly felt exhausted and sad. This should never have required a lawsuit. Tyler should have paid me back when the original 6-month deadline passed. The family should have supported accountability instead of enabling his deception. But we'd all chosen our positions, and now we had to live with the consequences. Tyler's immediate response to the judgment was exactly what I'd expected based on 30 years of watching him avoid responsibility. Instead of accepting the verdict and figuring out how to pay what he owed, he immediately began working to minimize and evade the consequences. Within hours of the judgment, Tyler was on the phone with family members, painting himself as the victim of a vindictive legal system that had been manipulated by my expensive lawyer. He claimed that he'd been railroaded by legal technicalities and that the judge hadn't understood the family context of the situation. Uncle Mike was Tyler's most vocal supporter in this narrative. "The judge doesn't understand how our family works," he told anyone who would listen. "She treated a family disagreement like some kind of corporate fraud case." But the family's support couldn't change the legal reality. Tyler owed me $12,140, and if he didn't pay voluntarily, I could use the court system to collect it. That's when I learned the difference between winning a lawsuit and actually collecting money from someone who's determined to avoid payment. Tyler's first strategy was delay and obfuscation. When the 30-day payment deadline passed without any money changing hands, Jennifer filed for wage garnishment. That's when we discovered that Tyler had quit his part-time job at a local marketing company just days after the judgment was rendered. "It's a common tactic," Jennifer explained. "Judgment debtors often try to make themselves judgment-proof by eliminating obvious sources of income that can be garnished." Tyler's next move was to claim poverty. Through his lawyer, he filed documents claiming that he had no assets and no income, making him unable to pay the judgment. He moved out of his parents' house and into a cheap apartment, claiming that he could barely afford basic living expenses, let alone a $12,147 legal obligation. But Tyler's social media told a different story. Even after claiming poverty to the court, his Instagram continued to feature photos from expensive restaurants, bars, and social events. When I brought this to Jennifer's attention, she filed for an asset discovery hearing, which would require Tyler to appear in court and explain under oath how he was funding his lifestyle while claiming to have no money. The asset discovery hearing was scheduled for late May, but Tyler failed to appear. A bench warrant was issued for his arrest, which finally seemed to get his attention. He appeared in court the following week with a new lawyer who claimed that Tyler had been confused about the hearing date due to stress and anxiety related to the lawsuit. Under oath, Tyler testified that he was living off gifts from friends and family and odd jobs that pay cash. He claimed that his expensive restaurant photos were from events where friends treated him, and that he was essentially homeless and destitute except for the generosity of others. Judge Williams was not impressed with this testimony, especially when Jennifer presented bank records showing that Tyler had received several large cash deposits totaling over $8,000 in the weeks following the judgment. When pressed about the source of these deposits, Tyler claimed they were birthday gifts and loans from friends to help with living expenses. Jennifer asked the obvious follow-up question. "Mr. Johnson, if friends are giving you thousands of dollars to help with living expenses, why can't that money be used to satisfy your legal obligation to the plaintiff?" Tyler's answer was a masterpiece of circular logic. "That money is for survival, not for paying judgments. I have to eat and have a place to live." Judge Williams ordered Tyler to begin making monthly payments of $500 toward the judgment, regardless of his claimed poverty. She also ordered him to provide monthly financial statements showing his income and expenses. Tyler's response to the payment order was to simply ignore it. Month after month passed with no payments and no financial statements. Each missed payment resulted in additional contempt of court proceedings, which Tyler would skip, leading to additional bench warrants, which would eventually force him to appear and promise to comply, only to disappear again the following month. Meanwhile, the family's response to Tyler's legal troubles was to close ranks around him even more protectively. Uncle Mike hired Tyler as a consultant for his home renovation business, paying him cash for vague services that allowed Tyler to claim minimal reportable income while actually receiving substantial financial support. Aunt Sarah started a family email chain asking relatives to contribute to a legal defense fund for Tyler, framing the ongoing contempt proceedings as evidence that I was using the court system to harass and persecute Tyler beyond what was reasonable. The most painful development was how the extended family began to organize social events specifically designed to exclude me while including Tyler. Cousin Emma's baby shower, Uncle David's retirement party, Grandma Rose's 80th birthday celebration, I was systematically uninvited from family gatherings, while Tyler was welcomed with open arms as the victim of my vindictive legal campaign. When I confronted Mom about being excluded from Grandma's birthday party, her response was devastating in its casual cruelty. "Honey, you know Tyler will be there, and everyone's still upset about this whole lawsuit situation. We just thought it would be better for family harmony if you sat this one out." "Family harmony?" I asked. Tyler stole my money and has spent a year evading a court order to pay it back. But I'm the problem for family harmony? Mom sighed deeply. Jessica, you got your judgment. You won in court. At some point, you have to decide whether being right is worth destroying your relationships with everyone you love. That conversation crystallized something I'd been struggling to accept. The family wasn't just enabling Tyler anymore. They were actively choosing him over me. In their minds, Tyler's financial irresponsibility and legal troubles were less threatening to family stability than my insistence on accountability and consequences. I was being punished not for being wrong, but for being right in a way that made everyone else uncomfortable. The final straw came at Christmas 2024, when I received a group text message about the family Christmas Eve celebration at Uncle Mike and Aunt Sarah's house. The message was sent to the extended family group chat, but I was conspicuously absent from the recipient list. I only saw it because my brother Marcus forwarded it to me separately. I think you should know, Marcus texted. They're having Christmas Eve at Mike and Sarah's, but they specifically said you're not invited because they don't want drama with Tyler. I stared at that text message for a long time, realizing that I'd officially become the family outcast. Tyler, who had lied, stolen, and spent a year evading legal accountability, would be opening presents and enjoying family dinner. I, who had done nothing but refuse to let myself be robbed without consequences, would be spending Christmas Eve alone. That's when I made a decision that I should have made months earlier. I was done fighting for a family that had chosen not to fight for me. I called Jennifer and asked her to arrange a settlement meeting. I was willing to accept partial payment and close the case, not because Tyler deserved a break, but because I deserved to move on with my life. Are you sure? Jennifer asked. We're actually making progress with the asset discovery. I think we can collect most of the judgment eventually. I'm sure, I said. This isn't about the money anymore. It's about getting these people out of my life so I can focus on building relationships with people who actually value honesty and accountability. The settlement meeting took place in January 2025 at Jennifer's office. Tyler showed up with Uncle Mike and his lawyer, offering to pay $6,000 in total satisfaction of the $12,947 judgment. It was insulting, less than half of what he owed, but it was also more money than I'd seen from Tyler in over 2 years. I accepted the settlement not because it was fair, but because it allowed me to close this chapter of my life and focus on moving forward. Tyler paid the $6,000 settlement the following week, money that almost certainly came from his parents, not from any efforts of his own. As part of the settlement agreement, both sides agreed not to discuss the case publicly, which meant Tyler could continue telling people that the lawsuit had been dismissed or settled in his favor. I used the settlement money as a down payment on a small condo in Southeast Portland, finally achieving my goal of homeownership, just with a longer timeline and a smaller place than I'd originally planned. The condo was perfect for me. A cozy 2-bedroom unit with a small balcony overlooking Mount Hood, close to the restaurants and breweries I loved, and most importantly, paid for with money I'd earned through my own work and Tyler's reluctant settlement payment. But the real victory wasn't financial. The real victory was the clarity I'd gained about who my real family was and who deserved space in my life. The people who had stood by me during the lawsuit, my friend Madison, a few coworkers who had listened to me vent during lunch breaks, my brother Marcus, who had tried to stay neutral but had at least treated me with respect. Those were my real support network. The people who had chosen Tyler's comfort over my legitimate grievances. They were revealed to be fair-weather relatives whose loyalty was conditional on my willingness to absorb mistreatment without complaint. Looking back, the $6,000 I recovered from Tyler was the cheapest education I ever got about human nature and family dynamics. It taught me that blood relationships don't guarantee loyalty or integrity, that enabling destructive behavior is often disguised as family love, and that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is to walk away from people who consistently choose to hurt you. Tyler's story didn't end with our settlement, of course. According to Marcus, who still maintains relationships with both sides of the family divide, Tyler continued his pattern of financial irresponsibility and manipulation for months after our case was closed. He borrowed money from other family members for various opportunities and emergencies, always with promises of repayment that never materialized. But that was no longer my problem. I'd learned my lesson about lending money to Tyler, and more importantly, I'd learned my lesson about expecting accountability from a family system that was designed to protect him from consequences. The golden child was still golden, at least in the eyes of the people who mattered most to him. But he was no longer my problem, and I was no longer available to fund his lifestyle or absorb the cost of his poor decisions. Sometimes winning means getting your money back. Sometimes winning means getting a court judgment that validates your version of events. But sometimes winning just means getting free of people who don't value you enough to treat you fairly. In the end, that was the victory that mattered most. It's been almost a year since the settlement, and I can honestly say that my life has never been better. Cutting ties with the toxic family dynamics that had shaped my entire adult life turned out to be the best decision I ever made, even though it was also one of the hardest. The first few months were rough. Despite everything that had happened, I still found myself reaching for my phone to text mom about work accomplishments or funny things that happened during my day. I'd catch myself planning to bring up certain topics at family gatherings that I was no longer invited to attend. The holidays were particularly difficult, as I had to create new traditions to replace the family celebrations that were no longer part of my life. But gradually, the absence of constant family drama and manipulation allowed me to see how much emotional energy I'd been spending on maintaining relationships with people who didn't actually support or value me. Without the regular stress of Tyler-related family meetings and crises, I slept better, worked more effectively, and had more time and mental space to invest in relationships that actually brought joy to my life. My friendship with Madison deepened as I had more time to spend with her and wasn't constantly distracted by family issues. We started taking weekend trips together, hiking in the Columbia River Gorge, visiting wineries in the Willamette Valley, exploring Portland's food scene. Having a friend who valued my perspective and trusted my judgment was a refreshing contrast to years of being told I was overreacting or being unreasonable. I also started dating again, something I'd put on the back burner during the stress of the lawsuit. It turns out that when you're not constantly drained by family drama, you have more emotional availability for romantic relationships. I met David through a rock climbing group, and what started as a shared interest in outdoor adventures grew into a genuine partnership with someone who appreciates my independence and integrity. The most surprising development was how my career took off once I wasn't dealing with the constant stress and distraction of Tyler-related family crises. Without the emotional exhaustion of ongoing family conflict, I had more energy to focus on my work and pursue new opportunities. I was promoted to senior marketing coordinator at my tech company, with a salary increase that more than made up for the money I'd lost in Tyler's settlement. I also expanded my freelance graphic design business, taking on higher-end clients and more complex projects. The discipline and attention to detail I developed during my investigation of Tyler's fraud turned out to be valuable skills in client relations and project management. Several clients mentioned that they appreciated working with someone who was thorough, reliable, and clear in her communications, qualities that had been dismissed as obsessive and unreasonable by my family. Most importantly, I learned to trust my own judgment again. The family's gaslighting had made me second-guess my instincts about Tyler's dishonesty and their enabling behavior. But the lawsuit had proved that my concerns were valid, my evidence gathering was thorough, and my desire for accountability was reasonable. That validation gave me confidence to trust my perceptions in other areas of life, from work decisions to personal relationships. My new condo became a sanctuary that reflected my own tastes and priorities, rather than trying to accommodate family expectations. I furnished it with pieces I loved, rather than items that would impress relatives at family gatherings. I hosted dinner parties for friends who appreciated good conversation and mutual respect. I created a home office space where I could work on freelance projects without interruption from family drama. The financial impact of cutting ties with the family was actually positive. Without the social pressure to contribute to Tyler's various schemes or participate in expensive family events, I was able to save more money and invest in my own priorities. I started a retirement account, built up an emergency fund, and even began investing in index funds, financial goals that had been impossible when I was regularly being pressured to bail out Tyler. But perhaps the most significant change was in my relationship with my brother Marcus. With the family pressure removed, Marcus and I were able to develop a genuine adult friendship based on mutual respect rather than shared obligation to family dysfunction. Marcus had tried to stay neutral during the lawsuit, which I'd initially interpreted as a lack of support. But as we talked more privately over the months following my settlement with Tyler, I realized that Marcus had been in an impossible position. As the youngest family member, he'd felt unable to openly challenge the family's protection of Tyler, but he'd also been uncomfortable with how I was being treated. I knew Tyler was lying about the business, Marcus told me over coffee one Saturday morning in my new neighborhood. But I also knew that saying so would just make me the next target for family pressure. I'm sorry I didn't speak up for you. Having that honest conversation with Marcus allowed us to build a relationship based on honesty rather than family obligation. He still attends some family events with Tyler, but he also makes time for regular one-on-one visits with me, where we can talk openly about our lives and experiences. It's the healthiest family relationship I've ever had, precisely because it's voluntary rather than expected. Marcus also serves as my occasional source of information about what's happening with Tyler and the extended family, though I'm careful not to let that information affect my emotional well-being. According to Marcus, Tyler's pattern of financial irresponsibility continued after our settlement. He borrowed money from cousin Emma for a cryptocurrency investment opportunity that never materialized. He asked Grandma Rose for a loan to help with medical expenses that turned out to be cosmetic dental work. He even tried to get Uncle David to co-sign a car loan by claiming he needed reliable transportation for his new consulting business. Some family members are starting to wise up to Tyler's patterns, according to Marcus. Cousin Emma refused his most recent request for money, and Uncle David told him to get a traditional job before asking for help with major purchases. But the core enablers, Uncle Mike, Aunt Sarah, and my parents, continue to provide financial support and emotional protection for Tyler's poor choices. Mom asks about you sometimes, Marcus told me during one of our coffee visits. She seems sad that you're not part of family events anymore, but she's not willing to acknowledge that Tyler did anything wrong. I felt a twinge of sadness hearing that, but no temptation to reach out or try to repair the relationship. Mom had chosen her position when she testified on Tyler's behalf during the trial, and I'd chosen mine when I accepted that some relationships can't be salvaged if the other person isn't willing to acknowledge reality. The most liberating realization I had during this process was that I don't owe anyone a relationship, even family members. The idea that blood relationships are permanent and must be maintained regardless of how poorly you're treated is a myth that keeps people trapped in harmful dynamics. Just like any other relationship, family relationships should be based on mutual respect, trust, and genuine care for each other's well-being. I also learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for someone is to stop enabling their destructive behavior, even if they interpret your boundaries as abandonment or punishment. By continuing to bail Tyler out and protect him from consequences, the family was actually preventing him from developing the life skills and emotional maturity he needed to become a functional adult. My refusal to participate in that enabling was ultimately more loving than their continued protection, even though it felt harsh in the moment. Tyler needed to learn that his actions had consequences and that other people wouldn't indefinitely absorb the cost of his poor decisions. The family's continued enabling meant he never had to learn those lessons. Looking ahead, I feel optimistic about my life in a way that wouldn't have been possible while I was still enmeshed in toxic family dynamics. I'm building relationships based on mutual respect and shared values. I'm pursuing career goals that align with my interests and abilities. I'm making financial decisions based on my own priorities, rather than family pressure. Most importantly, I'm no longer available to be anyone's emotional dumping ground or financial safety net unless they're willing to treat me with the respect and honesty I deserve. That boundary has improved every relationship in my life, because the people who are willing to meet that standard are the people worth having relationships with. I sometimes wonder what would have happened if I'd set those boundaries earlier, if I'd refused Tyler's initial request for money or insisted on accountability from the beginning. But I don't regret the path I took, because it taught me valuable lessons about manipulation, enabling, and the difference between supporting someone and being exploited by them. The golden child may still be golden in the eyes of his remaining enablers, but he's no longer my responsibility. And I'm no longer a victim of family dynamics that prioritized his comfort over my legitimate needs and boundaries. That freedom is worth more than any amount of money Tyler could have paid back.